story of Esther. Okay? And Esther is a wonderful story, and I'm glad to be able to do this. Now, the story of Esther starts off with the king named Ahasuerus, a.k.a. Xerxes, which I'll use today. Now, Xerxes was this Persian king of great wealth and means. Now, if Lil Wayne can make it rain, well, then Xerxes did it bigger than spring. I mean, this king really did his thing when it came down to feasting and such, because, see, Xerxes was renowned for partying and feasting it up. He threw this huge ditty at his capital city called the Citadel of Susa. Had it looking real pretty. The city and the palace were done in array. Let me give you an analysis of the royal display. They had fine festive fabrics of white, green, and blue that lavished the citadel with colors as the people came through. On cords of the finest linen of purple on solid silver rings. Now the pillars were marble and the gardens were pristine. I mean, the pavement was even laden with colors too, because it was precious stone set in marble of red, white, black, and blue. And the couches and chairs, I'm told, was solid silver and gold, proudly polished and fitted with comfortable pillows. But all the dignitaries, the military leaders and the like, well, they filled Xerxes' palace for 6 months, day and night. And then Xerxes invites all of his peeps, from the greatest even right down to the least. Though the greatest feasted for about 6 months and the least only feasted a week. But for 6 months and a week, a drunken feast went on. See, I told you, Xerxes' pockets was deep and his money was long, because each person was holding a golden vessel with royal wines of all kinds to wet their whistle. And each vessel was different, no two were alike, diverse in style, form, width, and height. Oh, and the queen got to invite all the women of the realm to her royal feast with her at the helm. So this feast was on slam, like people were popping bottles and going ham. And I can almost imagine someone screaming, "Oh, that's my jam!" As the magicians played the hits of the day, and people were sipping and drinking in their own way. Now the king got tipsy too, and he decided to say, "Bring Queen Vashti to dance and display her beauty and her elegance and the crown royal." But what happens next makes the king blood boil. The queen disobeyed, and the king was wroth. So he couldn't stand that his commands were taken for naught, though he fought off his embarrassment of Vashti's arrogance, and it probably put a damper on his fun and his merriment. But after the feast, you better believe it was on. He couldn't wait to impeach Vashti off the throne. And he brought his wise men along, too, as he would often do. And they were chauvinistic yes men, and y'all know that's true, because they went through all of Vashti's cons, but not one of her pros. You know, at first they were fond of her, but now they want to depose. Just want to throw her out of office with contempt and drama. Kind of remind me of them people that's against Obama. After this drama had taken its leave and the king's anger was finally appeased, he grieved his queen and wanted to reprieve his queen. But Vashti was lost and he couldn't do a thing, because once the law was decreed by the Persians and the Medes, no one could intercede, not even the king. But then his wise men addressed him and they made a great suggestion, something that was sure to bring him out of his depression. His yes men suggested that they should get the bestest virgins in the kingdom to gather them and bring them, to purify and clean them until the king has seen them, and then the king can choose the one which he approves. The king said, "Cool, I like that plan," which is something you might expect of a typical man. But in this Persian land, there also lived a Jewish guy. Now, his name was Mordecai, and Mordecai worshiped and served God the Most High. And just to give a bird's eye view of who Mordecai is and what it is he did, allow me to pause for the cause and tell y'all that Mordecai was a descendant of King Saul. That's right, he was an Israelite and a Benjamite, and he did what was right in God's sight. This upright descendant or remnant of the Babylonian captivity of the Jews, which Nebuchadnezzar subdued. Well, more biblical clues on that thing can be found in the 24th chapter of 2 Kings. This Mordecai, he had this beautiful cousin that he had adopted, whose name was Hadassah. But to conceal her Jewish identity, he called her Esther.
This Esther had courage like watch it, sister Aunt Esther, faith like JJ's mother Esther Rowe, and a sex appeal of Beyonce when her last name was known. For this girl was beautiful to behold, from her follicles to her toes. I mean, finer than pure gold, and then God broke the mold. And if the story be told, when she strode into the palace, they already knew she was the finest. And Haggai, the chief custodian, well, he couldn't help but show her kindness. I guess it was God's favor shining on that girl, because when Haggai seen her, it just rocked his world. I mean, he adored her and was floored by her, and he knew great things were in store for her. So the more he got to know her, he wanted more and more for her. So he poured into her his sure knowledge of everything that the king liked. And he favored Esther more than the other virgins, for she found favor in his sight. And for the next year of Esther's life, Haggai prepared her for becoming the king's new wife. Cosmetics and perfumes, jewels and new clothes, bathing in scented pools and grottos, came out looking like some kind of top model. Hair raw, flawless body like a Coke bottle. And y'all know, when the king finally seen what he seen standing right there beside him, y'all know what I mean, like Juanita Bynum would sing One Night with the King, changes everything. Because after that night, Esther became queen. But Esther still hadn't yet confessed that she was Jewish, and Mordecai had told her that it would be foolish. And she always listened to Mordecai's tutelage. Even since she was a child, she made Mordecai proud. But meanwhile, somehow, Mordecai got this promotion to sit at the king's gate. Now, some of y'all might think this was a blessing from Esther, but I call it fate, or at least a lesson on how God demonstrates his authority, because it was poetry how things fell into place. You see, he overheard 2 assassins that were plotting to kill the king. And since he was in this new position to listen, he overheard everything. So he informed Esther, who now was the queen, and Esther told the king in Mordecai's name. The king done an investigation, and the assassins were hanged. So now Mordecai's name and story was written in the royal diaries. That's where all the records on the entire empire be. But after his story was told, the royal annals were just closed. Now why they didn't do more for Mordecai? Well, only God knows. But then rose this new official who was promoted by the king. Now this dude's name was Haman. Boo! Because Haman was wicked and mean. But he was promoted over the other officials under the king's reign. So he was second in charge and living large, conceited, arrogant, and vain. But the king had ordered his nobles and officials to bow and worship Haman. And Haman wore an idolatrous idol embroidered on his raiment. So if you bow to Haman, then you also bow to his idol. And for a Jew, that would be blasphemy and spiritually suicidal. So Mordecai refused to bow. And when Haman was made aware, he vowed a vow, an evil vow with a fate that was so unfair. He declared, I won't just kill Mordecai alone. I'm going to kill the race of Mordecai too. So at that moment, with no atonement, he became the enemy of the Jew. And he had his men to cast some dice to set the date that they would kill, destroy, and annihilate. And then he went to the king to plead the case and pretended that the king was in dire straits, saying, Sire, there's a great and irate people dispersed among us that don't even follow your laws. And king, it ain't in your best interest to tolerate them at all. So if you call for their destruction, I'll pay for the whole campaign. The king said, the money and the people are under your power, and gave Haman his signet ring. Now Haman had the power to devour the Jews. And it's a shame how the king got played like a fool. Because the Jews of Persia was facing a serious plight with only 352 days of life. That's right. When 11 months passes by, they would all die. And when Mordecai read the royal decree, he began to wail and cry. And he put on his sackcloth and mourning clothes. And he laid in ashes with mourns and woes. And when Esther found out that her cousin was in trouble, she dispatched her servants to him on a double. And they asked him the reasons for his pains and struggles. And he could hardly speak because he was so befuddled. But he told them of the pending disaster of the Jews and showed them Haman's decree of the massacre too. And he told them to ask her to go talk to the king and see if maybe the king might do anything. But Esther said, no, because death is the penalty for those that break that law and go before the king without being caught. Except he extends his royal scepter, you're going to surely fall. And it's been 30 days since I seen the king at all. So Mordecai replied, well, don't think just because you're the queen that you alone gonna survive. Though salvation will rise for the Jews, somehow you and your father's house will die. So trust in your religion and loyalty. And this I must insist. And who knows, maybe you've risen to royalty for a time such as this.
Go ahead.
So Esther relayed, will gather all the Jews of Susa and fast and pray for 3 days. And I'm going to do the same with my eunuchs and maids. And when 3 days and nights has passed us by, I'm going to go before the king. And if I die, I die. So they fasted and prayed for 3 whole days. And when Esther went before Xerxes, miraculously her life was stayed. And the king even asked her desires up to half the empire. But with a fate so dire, she ain't want to misfire. And said, sire, please come to the banquet that I've arranged for you. And I'd also like you to bring Haman too. So when Xerxes and Haman went to Queen Esther's banquet, the king asked her desires again. And she said, sire, come to the banquet that I'll arrange tomorrow and bring Haman, and I'll tell you then. So now when Haman went home, he bragged to his friends and his family about his status and glory. But Mordecai understandably kept ruining his story. So his wife said, well, if you truly want Mordecai gone, then build some gallows on the lawn and wish to hang him upon. And then go to the king and see if it'll be all right. So Haman had some gallows built, 50 cubits in height. But that very same night, Xerxes couldn't sleep as he lay in his bed. So he asked his men to come in and had the chronicles read. And it said that Bigthan and Teresh tried to assassinate the king, but Mordecai the Jew intervened. And he put a stop to the plot, and the king's life was saved. And the king asked, well, what honors have we given to this Mordecai the brave? They said, well, none, sire. So the king inquired, who's out in the royal court? Now Haman came aiming to hang Mordecai, but he needed the king's support. But before he can get a word in edgewise, the king cut him off of a sword and asked, what would you do for a man I'd love to honor? And Haman thought of himself, of course. So he suggested some things, and he proposed to the king some things from scenes of his wildest dreams. And the king agreed and was pleased as pie, but said, now go do all those things for Mordecai. And you could see in Haman's eyes that it really hurt his pride. He requested not to do it, but his request was denied. And he realized, I personally had to bathe my enemy and shave my enemy. In a lot of ways, I'm going to be a slave to my enemy. Clothe him, robe him, and then escort him around town on one of the king's royal chariots with the crest and the crown. But he did it, and he went home, and he was feeling down. And his head was covered in shame. And his wife said, well, if this Mordecai the Jew is a Benjamite, baby, that kind of changes the game. Because, see, there's a blessing of victory over the Benjamites. So, baby, I think you might lose this fight. And no sooner did she said that, the king's eunuchs arrived to escort Haman to Esther's famous feast surprise. And when he finally got there, he was terribly unaware of Esther's plans to call him out. But when the king asked Esther her desires again, Haman couldn't believe what came out of her mouth. She said, my desire is my life, and the life of my people, for we have been sold for a price by a person of evil, to be annihilated, killed, destroyed, and slain. If we'd have just been made slaves, king, I wouldn't have said a thing. And the king said, my queen, who would do this to me? Who would dare to defy the great Xerxes? And she pointed and said, Haman. Haman was horrified. She said, Haman is the wicked and vile man that lied. And the king stood up in anger, and he left the room. Now Haman could tell he was in danger because he could smell his doom. And then he fell upon Esther as he was begging for his life. The king returned and saw and said, will you even molest my wife? And with haste, the eunuchs covered Haman's face with something like a pillowcase, and they drug him from the palace in full disgrace. And not because of his malice and extreme hate, he was hung on his own gallows, a very fitting fate. Yeah. And then the king gave Esther Haman's estate, which she gave to Mordecai, who became very great. And then the queen begged the king to rescind Haman's law, but the law was something that the king couldn't withdraw. So he made another law in order to counteract so that the Jews could assemble, prepare, and attack. So when the 13th day of Adar arrived, all of the Jews' adversaries died. So a day that was meant for the Jews' annihilation, God turned it into a Purim celebration. And each year, this Purim celebration still stands as a commemoration of the Jews' deliverance from Haman's evil plan. And if I'm right about it, stand and say amen.
Amen. Amen.